We are
Great.
live.
We are. I believe that you can see the button there. Good morning to everybody who is on Clubhouse, and good morning to everybody who is watching us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook as well. Thank you very much for joining. And this is Japan Expert Insights, the Wednesday morning room with Tim Sullivan, me, and today we have a very special guest, Sam Barker. I'm very happy to introduce Sam Barker to you. Well, Sam is somebody, he is a professional in marketing and advertising and also
Ooh, Maya,
right?
you're
And now he's
frozen.
a marketing. Am I? Oh, wow.
Now you're
I'm
okay. You're
sorry.
back.
No, you're okay,
That's
and
fine.
I think you're back now.
Great. I think that everybody in Clubhouse can hear me actually. But, well, I'm going to say that again. So today we welcome Sam Barker, a marketing professional here, yes,
Same
for
spot.
a couple of years.
Yeah,
The same spot again. Obviously, that's the pain point. Probably the streamline doesn't like
that's
it.
all right. They caught it on Clubhouse, so we're good.
Right. Okay. So apologies for this. And Sam, it looks like live stream is so I'm going to give you the floor now. Going to give you the microphone. So please go ahead, introduce yourself, and let's talk about landing your business in Japan. To everybody in Clubhouse, you're welcome to share your comments and questions in the chat room or also come up on stage and we are going to answer them there. Good morning. Good morning to, yes, Seiichiro-san. You are on LinkedIn, I believe. Thanks for watching. Okay, Sam, the floor is yours. Let's start.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Maya and Tim, for allowing me to appear here. And first of all, I'd just like to thank everyone that is on the stream today. I know it's quite early morning where you are, a little bit later where I am. It's 11 p.m. for me, 8 a.m. for Japan. So I'm sure you're all raring to go for the day. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be here. And thanks a lot for coming to this talk on landing your business in Japan. So a little bit of background. Maya's given a little bit already. So I'm a marketing professional. I work in international software. I used to live in Japan. I was an English teacher for a year, as many people have been over the course of the years. Maybe we've got some on the call even today. So I lived in Japan. I lived in Tokyo. Then I moved from Tokyo back to the UK to start my marketing career. So I've been working for about for the 4 or 5 years now since I came back from Japan. And now that I've sort of trained up a little bit, skilled up a little bit in terms of my marketing abilities, one of the things I'm really looking to do is to reach back out to professionals in Japan. I've always had an interest in business in Japan. When I was teaching in Japan, so I was teaching in elementary schools, but I was also teaching business English. And this was a wonderful experience. I was able to go around and talk to civil servants, doctors, engineers, all kinds of really high-level English ability people doing very interesting things. And this is what really piqued my interest, started my interest in Japanese business. So now that I've sort of trained up, I'm looking at things from a bit more of a marketing perspective. I wanted to reach out to business professionals in Japan to understand what their kind of life was like in Japan, what were their experiences, because there's so many different diverse experiences in Japan. Most of the people I was speaking to were from LinkedIn, actually, via LinkedIn groups, and it's amazing the different diversity of people you can find there. So I was able to approach people that worked in really interesting industries, marketing agencies, advertising agencies, import export, big tech, luxury car rentals. Someone was working in. Fascinating. So I think I've got a really decent breadth of people I was able to talk to, and that's led to some really interesting conclusions. The thing I came to them with was quite simple. What advice would you have? What would you give to someone or an organization that was interested in starting up a business in Japan, moving to Japan, or opening a bureau in Japan, anything related to this sort of cross-cultural international business? Very interesting topic, and I hope what I've got for you here today will be interesting. So, basic context, I think we all know Japan, third largest economy in the world, And even then, it kind of punches above its weight in terms of its cultural pull, business pull, the pop culture, food, technology of Japan. It's got a real magnetism to it, which is one of the reasons it's so interesting to talk about. It's from my marketing perspective, my marketing brain, it's pretty easy to get people enthusiastic about Japan, interested about Japan. And as we'll talk a little bit about later, that comes with some good things and some bad things. The enthusiasm can be there. There can also be some preconceptions there, and some stereotypes and things are not so interesting or useful. But regardless, Japan, big, important, not going away, and it finds itself at a very interesting crossroads now with the rise of China alongside the United States, its traditional big ally. Japan's in a really interesting position here. And like I said, hopefully we've got some interesting insights for you today. So I've broken them down into 3 main points. These discussions I was having, there were 3 main themes that I kept coming back to when I was sort of shifting through the interviews, when I was having these discussions. Language, mindset, and diversity. Language, mindset, and diversity. 3 main points with a lot of different issues coming out of them. So let's start with the obvious one, language. Japan's a relatively monolingual country. Obviously, like I say, maybe some people on the call today will have some experience either as English teachers being taught English. There's a pretty substantial English language industry in Japan. There is some debate about how effective it is and how much is actually taken on by the population. Japan ranks 78 out of 112 in the EF English Proficiency Index, so not terrible, but not fantastic. This isn't somewhere like the Netherlands or Germany where English language ability tends to be much higher. And so this kind of cross-cultural discussions can usually just take place in English. That's not going to happen in Japan. So what's the main takeaway? If you want to do business in Japan, you need to find people who speak Japanese. And if you've got the ability with Japanese, fantastic. If not, you need to hire the right people. Don't try to fake it. There's a lot of temptations out there now, translation tools, AI tools even, useful tools, but a tool isn't a substitute for someone who really knows what they're doing. If you use these tools, they're great, they're awesome. Like I said, multiple people that I was speaking to have experience of using these things, but they're not a backbone. You need people who actually understand the language. And moreover, understanding a language doesn't just mean understanding the words or the alphabet. There's much more that goes on here. Language isn't just copying and pasting words. It's not just a matter of putting things through translations and copying exactly what comes out the other side and slapping that on. If you've got marketing materials in English, those marketing materials are going to have to be turned into Japanese, but they're also going to have to look different. They're going to have to potentially have a different UI, UX, a user experience. If we're talking a website, the way Japanese folds onto the page is different from the way English goes onto the page. There's a lot of elements here that need a real attention to detail. And it's not rocket science. The way to do this is to hire people who know what they're doing, who have a real genuine either bilingual attitude, or you could have some kind of system of English speakers and Japanese speakers working very closely through a bilingual colleague and having a kind of, a daisy chain of people who know the language quite well. Because the simple fact of why language is so important, the quickest way to look like you don't know what you're doing is to mess up the presentation. If you're competing in a competitive marketplace, you're on Google Ads, you're on Bing, you're on Yahoo, you're really trying to get into a market and you don't know what you're talking about, you're full of mistakes, nothing's going to happen. So step 1, language. And like I say, it would seem relatively obvious that it's important, and it definitely is. So it's relatively simple there in terms of taking it on, but it does mean you need to invest in this kind of ability. You need to actually, get people who know what they're doing. Now, mindset, language, mindset, and diversity. We come to mindset. This is probably the biggest topic and the one that there's the most kind of debate and discussion to be had on. So different consumers want different things. It's a basic principle and it crosses borders, both internally and across countries. So doing business in Japan is going to require a different mindset to doing business in your native country. makes sense. You'd think as well that this would be something that people would understand. But it does require a little bit of drilling down, as we'll go into. So do your research and learn about the markets you are entering. So like I said, I was able to speak to people in lots of different markets, some of which were very competitive, some of which were more niche. But regardless, you need to understand the market you're going into. Is it import, export, business, finance, startups, B2B, B2C? What does the market look like now? Because it's not necessarily going to look like the way it does in your home country. What are the specifics? What are the idiosyncrasies? So here's a specific example. One of the people I was able to speak to worked at Amazon. So Amazon in Japan had a experiment that they ran of drop-off delivery. Now in the UK, and I'm sure in the US and Canada and all the various other places that people are calling in from, drop-off delivery is relatively common. You know, the Amazon people come, they ring the doorbell. If you're not in, they drop it off. Pretty popular in the West, but it's not in Japan. And this person I was speaking to was saying that they tried this in Japan and it just didn't work. People didn't like it, and it wasn't it spooked people, and they didn't take to it. But you have to sometimes give these things a go. You know, this was a project that he was working on for quite a while, relatively enthusiastic. Think about the number of failed deliveries that it takes to hand a package to someone in person. And yet the drop-off delivery, it received very negative consumer feedback, and it wasn't something that they wanted to push on with. Sometimes there are genuine divergences in markets. This is rarer. This is a little bit more historic, but I still think it's an interesting example. It's something worth looking at, even if from a historic perspective. So if you think about the Japanese mobile market, the historic abundance of things like flip phones, again, kind of a stereotype almost, but also something that's slightly sort of forgotten to history is how ahead of the curve Japan was on mobile internet, internet on the mobile, which came, you know, much earlier and much more substantially than in the West. Obviously, like I say, this is slightly historic now in terms of the abundance of smartphones, which is relatively as ubiquitous in Japan as it is in the rest of the world. But still, what technology are people using? How are they using it? Very, very important to understand. Understanding this can come with major upsides. So another example I really like, speaking to an individual who worked in green tea, importing and exporting green tea. He was telling me that it's quite a conservative industry, as you might expect, right? It's a very traditionalist, very well regarded. It's one of the most iconic Japanese products, green tea. And he integrated himself into this market. One of the things he did, he could speak Japanese and understand Japanese fluently. So he was able to actually talk with people as equals. And this is where the language and the mindset come together. If you can speak the language, or you have people that can, you can converse with people as equals, understand their mindset a bit better. So this individual working in the green tea industry, he was able to integrate into quite a conservative industry, gain their trust, and thus really excel and really get the most out of what he was looking to get out of his business, which is excellent. And, you know, a good model for anyone who might want to do something similar in a similarly conservative kind of industry. We also come to, for instance, working with Japanese employees. Now, like I said previously, with the language system, if you're hiring people to understand the language and to help you use the language, they're going to be Japanese employees, raised in Japan potentially. They might have different expectations, working practices, ways ideas are expressed. Now, this becomes a bit controversial and a bit of a topic that needs to be handled really delicately. It can lead to some very blunt, stereotypical thinking, which isn't great. And this is something that I'll return to a little bit later in the talk. But understanding genuinely how people work is a good thing. The genuine differences of practices and expectations is very important. If you're hiring someone who has worked in Japan their entire life, what are they expecting? How can you meet them, you know, halfway so that you can get what you want and they can be comfortable? And I will say, just a little anecdote relating it to my personal, back when I was working in Japan as an English teacher. So I was quite green. I was very green. One of the first jobs I ever had. again, like I said before, I was in marketing, was fresh out of university, working as an English teacher. And I do remember the people that worked in the office, the sort of dispatch office, it was mostly Japanese employees, but there was a marked and very obvious difference between the Japanese employees who had lived abroad and those that hadn't. There was a slightly more relaxed attitude, perhaps, when dealing with the ALTs, the assistant language teachers, such as myself. And there was a very clear difference, perhaps out of familiarity of, mindset, perhaps out of familiarity of language, but it was definitely there. It's something that, and if you can feel it at that level, one of the most basic kind of relationships you can really get in Japanese industry, that between an ALT at the start of their career and a dispatcher, think about how important that is in more complex fields. But a really good point that was made to me, and like I said, this is where we start to critique our perspective, is that these cultural differences aren't inevitable, and they're not ingrained. And it's very important to figure out what are the different work practices and expectations, and what are issues you can work through. Using it as a crutch, as something to dismiss problems with. Oh, we can't understand. Oh, this is just the way things are done. Oh, I don't know what people are talking about here. Oh, it's very difficult for us to understand, this Japanese company, this Japanese importer, this Japanese client. That can get lazy. And it's important not to use this as a crutch, the idea of that there's an opaque Japanese way of working or thinking or such. So a good example might be feedback. The way feedback is given in Japan might be different to the way feedback is given in the West. There was one individual I was talking to who he kind of posited that there is, in fact, a way that Western companies and Western employees tend to be a bit more gung-ho with regards to giving things a go. Like I said, maybe when we open things to questions, this is something that I'd actually quite like to hear some feedback and discussion on. Are Western companies more willing to give things a go, see the outcomes, and then change the system? Or are the Japanese more fond of creating a system, trying to perfect it at the planning stage, and then go? Again, like I said, it's a complex thing to talk about, the idea of Japanese mitigating risk versus Westerners embracing risk. But it's something that is important to bear in mind. A little bit more high level, like I say, that's definitely a topic I'd be really interested to hear some feedback on. The way the feedback is given in offices and the way that people talk in offices. If you're running a company with lots of different employees, you're going to want everyone to feel like their voice counts, right? It's a very important topic. So like I say, going back to what I was saying about the importance to kind of self-criticize here. It's important to not essentialize Japan. It's important to not essentialize an entire country. Japan is a big place. There's lots of different people in it, lots of different opinions, markets, products in it. Don't fall for the lazy stereotypes. Like I said, it's very important to understand that in some markets, in some ways of working, there may indeed be a Japanese way, a Japanese standard, an industry standard, a technical standard. But that doesn't mean that there is a Japanese way of doing X all the time or Y all the time, and that these are iron laws you can just use. You can pull the lever, do it, and then forget about it. That's silly. And it's silly with regards to any country or really anything in the world, honestly. That's not really a sensible attitude to take if you're dealing with business and you're dealing with dynamic markets and such. So let's move away from these ideas. And this was something pretty much universal in all of the feedback I received, that this idea, speaking in terms of Japan as a monolith, the Japanese market as a monolith, Japanese people as a monolith, Japanese people do this, don't do that. Like I said, I know we touched on these ideas earlier, but I want to emphasize that these should be treated very delicately. Big country, lots of different ideas, markets, and desires. No one needs these 80s stereotypes about fax machines and salarymen. It's too old-fashioned now. If there was ever any truth to it, perhaps there was. Still, it's very important to move away from these and actually engage with the facts on the ground, as it were. And more to this point, this idea of Japan as kind of a monolith, as Japan as kind of a country with, and in many ways, monolingualism, perhaps. Japan is very monolingual. However, there is diversity within it. 2.3% of the Japanese population is foreign born. That's likely to grow. That section of Japanese society in itself is very interesting. Like I said, we might have a number of people on this call today that fit in with that. More globally perspectives, maybe English speaking. How do you reach these people? This growing segment, very switched on segment of Japan. They're very important to actually engage with these people as a thriving market and potential source of ideas. And in many ways, this is kind of what led me to Japan Expert Insights. And I was speaking to Maya actually the other day. We were having a conversation about why she formed Japan Expert Insights. And she was saying, look, part of it is this stereotyping about Japan, the laziness of it, which is, when you consider it's the third largest country in the world, it's third largest economy in the world, is real silliness, and shouldn't really be engaged with. And like I said, hopefully today this talk and the corresponding questions might be a source of what we can all learn from. I want to kind of, before I sort of wind down this talk part of the discussion, I do want to give a shout out to Gerardo Sullivan. So Gerardo was someone that engaged me on LinkedIn precisely about these issues. He was interested in my perspective on these kind of topics, these kind of international business perspectives, and we did have a discussion with him. And Gerard was telling me about the company he's working with called Debo, which I thought was quite interesting. So this is a marketing company that's trying to sort of blend these two systems. They've got half Japanese speakers and half English speakers, which I thought was really interesting. So they've really got a bilingual workspace. They've got some people that might only speak Japanese, some people that might only speak English, but it's a real mixture. So trying to do things like SEO, SEM, website development in a bilingual setting, Google AdWords being, are these ideal things to be doing? Cross borders, potentially, yes. I think it's very interesting. And of course, there's these different perspectives and different people, Japanese employees, English employees, bring a lot of diversity from a lot of different countries, but all focused on Japan. So I thought I just wanted to kind of give Gerard a shout out, because it was through him that I was introduced to Maya, and it was through him that I was given this opportunity to talk. So I really appreciated that. So in terms of the sort of talk, I'm sort of coming to the end now of the structured section, but like I said, I'd be really interested to hear any questions or comments that people have, because in many ways this topic lends itself to that kind of real serious engagement and discussion. But like I say, hope you found this talk section useful, and I'd definitely like to open it up to any questions that people might have.
Thank you very much, Sam. That was really a great talk. So
very good presentation. I appreciate that. And yeah, Maya, did you have anything? I got some things, but go ahead. I'd like you to go first, my friend.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Tim. Yes, I was just, nodding my head behind the scenes, in the echo chamber, actually, because when I was listening to Sam and I was thinking about the language and how, it all comes together. It's the language, it's the mindset, and it's also how you actually translate your understanding of the culture through the language and convey that understanding of the culture through the language. And I also loved what you said about the stereotypes, that those, the fax machine stereotype, and how the Japanese don't actually speak foreign languages. They are already old. And I can say this from experience, because when I came here 20 years ago, indeed, that was true. I mean, those stereotypes, they were still here. But now it's really fascinating to see how many more people actually here speak foreign languages. And I want to say that based on my experience with the Japan Association of Travel Agents, I have met some of the best Spanish and Russian language speakers here in Japan. And those two languages are difficult, and they're difficult not only for Japanese, they're difficult even for other people, who come from other...
Cyrillic is very difficult.
Yes,
the Russian
indeed.
alphabet, very difficult.
Yes, and I have met some of the best Russian or even also Estonian language speakers here in Japan. Imagine that. So I think that Japan is changing. So thank you very much for making that point too, Sam, and how important it is that we are open-minded and we get beyond the stereotypes, actually. So, but I have a few other things, but I want to give the words to Tim as well. So, Tim, go ahead.
Okay, well, I wanted to just kind of remark about each point, but I'll just do one. We can switch back and forth on this. But so I completely agree. Knowing the language is a big asset, and short of that, having a trusted person, Japanese person, help you with the communication. But as you know, and you pretty much stated it clearly, to navigate the waters, language isn't enough, right? And it's so intimately connected with the culture that you could speak the language perfectly, but misuse it or not be able to use it in a strategic way. And I don't mean that in a manipulative way. I mean, that's what language is. It helps you manipulate your environment. That's what it is, right? So even if you have a Japanese native speaker and they don't know how to use their own native language in a strategic way, they might not do you good either, right? So it's really important and I liken it to learning a foreign language is like learning to drive a car, right? The mechanical things of driving that car. But if you don't know the rules of the road, it's going to be a weapon rather than a tool to help you, right? So you have to know the cultural rules of the road, right? And just because you know how to say something doesn't mean it's a good idea to say it, right? So that's that's one of the things that struck me, and this is just me learning, like you. There was a time I was a beginner and I was making goofy mistakes. I knew how to say something, but I shouldn't have said it, right? I made those mistakes, right? And then the only thing about the mindset, when you said mindset, I had a slightly different image. I'm not saying my image is right or wrong. I was just thinking in a different way, right? So one discussion we often have is there are some people who quickly adapt to Japan. I'm talking about foreign, non-Japanese, who come here and they adapt and they fall in love with the country but they also acknowledge it's got pluses and minuses, but they figure out a way to adapt and they do really well here. They make friends, they thrive. And then there's a group that aren't that way, where there's this focus on what they perceive as the negative, and they can't adjust and they're frustrated and they're unhappy. And I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm just saying they have a different mindset, right? And so whether it's business or socially, your overall approach to the culture, some people just cultivate or have innately that mindset that makes it pretty easy. And once you figure things out, it's actually kind of fun, and there's a lot of positives. Anyway, that when you talked about it, but now I understand where you're coming from in terms of marketing.
No, Tim, I actually think that's a very good. So I guess the distinction I'd make is that all I was these kind of the idea of the 3 points is more like a business strategy point, right?
Right.
Like they're broad. Right. However, I think you've absolutely knocked that out the park there, because, and I'll connect the two. Let me connect the two. In terms of the language, you can do quite well in Japan and live quite a good life and be respectful and polite without a lot of Japanese. And this is the space that a lot of people are in. Again, like I said, let me connect it to the most basic stuff in the world, teaching English. First year, right out of university, teaching English as an ALT, didn't know what I'm doing, picking things up, dropping papers, all sorts of things. However, if you actually think and you are polite and respectful, and you cotton on to what people are doing. Are they bowing? You go into the headmaster's office, they offer you barley tea. Take the barley tea, drink the barley tea. Okay, that's kind of an important little ritual. This kind of thing's really important. And like you say, that comes from a mindset of curiosity and kind of humbling yourself. And I think that's probably the differentiator between people that might even have really good Japanese knowledge skills on paper, but if you can't apply that and you can't get stuck in, is a phrase that we might say in the UK, right? Get stuck in. Try, put yourself in the position where you can maybe make mistakes, but you bounce back from them because you're enthusiastic and you're interested about what's going on in Japan, and you try out using the language, or you try out some of the little cultural elements that might initially seem a bit, intimidating to you. But I think that you're completely correct that you can go a long way with that kind of, growth, curious mindset rather than a very locked in one.
Yeah, and in my case, I'm looking for the beauty of whatever I can in any culture. It doesn't mean I don't see what I don't think is beautiful, but sometimes it's just being open-minded to say, wow, I've never thought of it this way, but that's got value,
Yeah.
And it happened over the years. At first I didn't understand it, so I didn't even know, but yeah, interesting. Maya, did you have anything to add?
Oh, I actually love the point about curiosity, because we always talk about, to the point you made, Tim, about the mindset, but actually curiosity is really an important point.
Yes,
Because
I agree.
if you're not curious, right, you're not open actually to reaching out and trying to, to find new things or experience new things. And so I think that, that's really a great point, and we haven't talked about it before. But also, you also, if you let me go a little bit back to what you actually mentioned about cultural differences and how important it is, to be aware of that. And how there is a lot of diversity here in Japan. I cannot agree more with you. And once again, thank you for talking about, the, let's say, the outdated stereotype that Japan is monocultural and monolingual. Because I think that if we look back historically, we can see that there were a lot of villages, and they were situated in valleys, mountain valleys, and so on. And each village actually survived because the community was very tightly knit there, right? And then they developed their own culture. So, and when we think about that, of course, we can say, the Japanese culture is this or that, but there is so much diversity when we think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Micro level. And I can see that also nowadays it happens with every company too. Like
very feudalistic. It's very feudalistic. And as you said, Maya, it's tied in many ways to the geography. These isolated pockets of small towns across Japan, and I mean, look at all the dialects. That's just a more obvious, manifestation of those differences. So those are excellent. Yeah, like you said, every company's different. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, their own subculture.
So, I really like that point very much as well. And also, I think that the other day I saw somewhere, so I would like to hear your thoughts on this, Sam, but I saw somewhere that there was a survey here in Japan, and basically when people were asked how they perceive themselves, when it came to working as a team, or for a team, they thought that they were strongly collectivists. The Japanese perceive them as, collectivists. But on personal level, they actually thought that, they were individualists. So, and there were some comments, I think that I saw that on LinkedIn somewhere, but there were some comments, that how can this be? Because these are two opposite things, right?
Yeah.
So,
that's binary thinking, logic. Yeah,
exactly. But so what is your take on this, Sam? And Tim, yours as well. And anybody in a Clubhouse, of course, please, you can join me up here. Yes, Ren is coming up on stage, so we can, Ren, please come up and share your thoughts as well after we hear.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Ren.
Can you hear everybody? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. I decided to raise my hand because I only now learn that, Maya, you have been in Japan for 20 years, you said?
21.
Yeah. 21. That's longer than the years I have spent in Japan. So you are my
Right.
senpai.
Oh,
So I have
Yes.
to ask you a question. You said
Okay.
that you said the fact. You said what that was. Japan has changed since
Mhm.
20 years ago. But I'm more interested in your take on the why part. Why do you think Japan have changed? I'm sure there are many reasons, but if you had to pick one, what would you say that Japan has changed since 21 years ago? You just came.
Right. So your question is why I think it has changed, or your question
Yeah.
is why
Why?
it
Why?
has
Why?
changed?
Why? You say it has changed, and I trust you, right?
Okay.
But
Thank you.
why change? If you have to pick one reason.
Well, first, Japan has changed. I think that it has changed because I can see a lot of. I mean, I have been here and I have talked with a lot of, local people in Japan, and I have seen how their way of thinking has changed actually towards, let's say, the first thing, foreigners here in Japan, and also towards work here in Japan. So, and also, I think, once again, I have said it before, but I believe that there are more people who speak foreign languages nowadays in Japan than there were 21 years ago. So that's
Why do you think that was the case? That became the case because I don't think the English education in Japan has changed.
no.
I mean, for example, in country like Taiwan, they start teaching English since the 5th grade in elementary school, but in Japan, it's the 1st grade of the junior high, and I
Indeed.
don't think that has changed. But why are there more Japanese who are able to speak foreign languages?
Well, first
these
of
days?
all, I think that yes, you are right about the English education here. And of course, I'm going to give the word to Sam and Tim afterwards. But if you allow me to share my thoughts, first of all, I think that there are more Japanese people who work overseas, and their kids naturally, who are exposed to, the education overseas. They learn the language there. So there are more Japanese expatriates. That's one thing. Another thing is I believe that there are more international families nowadays as well. And the kids of those international families here, they also speak, one or two foreign languages. And there are more expatriates who come to Japan nowadays, and I believe the number is bigger than it was 21 years ago. I cannot back it up with figures at the moment. I'm not prepared for that, but I can do some research and talk about it, in consequent sessions. But still, the number of international, let's say, expatriates who come to Japan, or Japanese expatriates who go overseas, has increased over the years, and as a result, the number of people who speak foreign languages has too. But I believe that there are other reasons as well, and I may be mistaken as well. So if you feel that I am, please let me know. Do not hesitate to do that.
No, I was just, I mean, your instinct was what I was interested in. So I'm not asking you to be the walking data bank. So please don't
Okay.
forget.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sam, how do you?
And-
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Just if you let me ask Sam and Tim what their thoughts
Yeah,
on this are, and then you can continue with your next question, Ren.
Yes, thank you.
My initial my initial thoughts would be maybe trying not to go over what you've already said, Maya, which I think is quite correct. I think the kind of inevitable march of globalization. I feel like when I think about Japan and I walk around Japan when I'm back there, things like Starbucks, you see McDonald's, you see Western brands, you see Western movies. I think there's something inevitable about with the spread of these kind of monocultural entities that are truly global. Nowhere is kind of safe from them, really. It can be anywhere on the globe, and you'll find these kind of elements of corporate culture. And I think that must, in some level, trickle down into English ability and familiarity with foreign cultures. I often think about, and Maya, maybe you can add some context to this, but or Tim, back in like the 80s or 90s, the train signs, weren't in English. They were just in Japanese. So you don't have like SHIBYUA. To me, that seems like basic. Like Japan would always have all of this English everywhere. But I think, maybe that's the tourist element. But I think there's something about English just becoming a part of people's everyday lives, even if it's just like a little piece of something they see on the internet, something they see on their mobile phone, Twitter, YouTube. I think all of these must, to some degree, trickle down in like a bacterial way and improve people's English ability, or at least the curiosity, and then maybe that develops into a more substantial English language acquisition.
Yeah,
Tim,
that makes perfect sense. That creeping globalization. I mean, I guess that's a good way to. It's a good way to put it. I would also say, and this just kind of adds on to what both of you said, is don't underestimate the power of human to human contact. Okay, and so Maya mentioned more people are speaking foreign languages here. I stepped away from Japan in 1987. I was from 77 to 87 when I was here. I was studying Japanese at the time, and I was an oddity. Foreigners who spoke and seriously studied Japanese, you were like a monkey at a typewriter. You were this curious thing that the Japanese never saw, and they were shocked when you could carry on even a basic conversation. So I leave in 87. I come back in 2018, and I'm meeting all these foreigners, many of whom are in this clubhouse room, who speak beautiful, fluent Japanese and understand the culture. There just weren't that many of us back then, and that it heartens me. And even in Atami here, I'm out in the boonies, right? There was never that many foreigners here. Maybe they'd bring in entertainers for their hotels, but there weren't a lot of non-Japanese here. I was coming here from the early 80s, right? Now there's so many. Yeah. And not only that, the locals are used to seeing them. They're used to interacting. They're not as freaked out as they were. So, I mean, I think there's some of that going on as well. There's a lot more foreigners here who know their stuff. Anyway, that's just kind of add on what both of you said, for what it's worth.
Yeah. If I can add, so we have a nice comment, a very good comment actually in Clubhouse by David Sharp, who says that while Japan has changed over the last 20 years, it was a gradual change for most of the time. However, during the 3 years before the Tokyo Olympics, the huge push by the government and national media cannot be underestimated.
Yeah,
that's a good point. I
think that's very, very true.
That's a really good point. Yes. I agree with that.
And also, yes, there was a noticeable change both in social attitudes and in employment. So suddenly lots of convenience stores had staff from Indonesia, Bangladesh, and etc. And I also wanted to add to that point that probably one thing is that, the push by the government to actually increase the number of inbound travelers also helped a lot.
Yeah.
Because
enormously successful, insanely so, crazily successful.
Yes.
Pre-COVID.
Wow, Ren, look at the analysis Ren inspired. This is great.
Yes. a lot of points.
A lot of good answers.
These are all great points.
Thank you, Ren. So what is your next question? I'm sorry that I kept you waiting.
No. It's not a question. It's more like a comment I was going to make, because as you know, because I was born in Taiwan, I speak Mandarin as well. And so I have observed friends of mine and myself who needs to speak English or Japanese. And do I think like a Japanese when I try to speak in English? For example, in Japanese culture, I may say, これをやってもいいですか? And I would try to say that in English, right? I say, may I do this or can I do, that kind of stuff. So this has not always proven to be the best way to try to speak English. I think when you are speaking English, you really need to think a little bit like how Americans think when you speak English. And the reverse is also true. And then over the years, I'm just sharing this with you. I think sometimes you can actually do that, do what I just said you shouldn't do in purposeful way to use that to your advantage, but you really need to understand the culture. For example, if you want to speak in Japanese, and if you think like American, and it may sound too pushy, too direct,
Yeah.
but if you understand that certain directness is appreciated in Japanese culture, that directness actually helps you. So, for example, if you are in Japan, and then if you are familiar with Japanese culture, you shouldn't be sticking your neck out too much, and you may try to say things like, これを提案します。これをやってもいいですか? May we do this? Shouldn't we do this? But in English, you may say, let's do it, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
if you
Let's give it a shot.
if you translate that to Japanese, it's like, これをやりましょう, right? And that is actually pretty acceptable level of proactiveness.
Right.
And maybe they forgive you if you're a foreigner. They let you get away with more.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the key, the secret sauce is always how much you know that is uniquely American, but and that part of Americans are actually appreciated by Japanese. And during that moment, you will actually act like an American and speaking in Japanese. And what part of Americans are not appreciated in Japan and don't try to speak Japanese with that American mentality. If you can draw that line, I think any foreigners can be successful. I just do not know how long you have to live in Japan to understand where to draw that line in Japan. But if you know how to do that, I guarantee you are going to be successful in Japan. That's my observation.
Ren, those are great points. I call that, by the way, finding your cross-cultural sweet spot. Finding that, like, being authentic, but still adjusting enough. And just one more quick thing, and then Maya, I'll let you chime in.
Okay.
The other thing about Japanese culture is that it's so much dependent on context. Okay. So if I'm in a semi-formal situation, that I'm going to be much less direct. But on the other hand, if I know somebody, if I have a personal relationship with somebody involved and we're almost like friends, then in a different context with me and that person, I can be much more direct and we can work things out offline. And I can pick their brain and or try to win their support, or so sometimes, again, Japanese can be indirect, but I think once you're inside a Japanese group with close friends, Japanese can be brutally direct in my experience. So again, it's context and knowing when to switch and how to switch. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree.
And which part of Japan you live? You live in Osaka or you live in Tokyo?
Yeah, that's another good point. I love Osaka because they're direct.
Yes. But if you let me add something here. So Ren, you said, I don't know how long you have to live in Japan before you actually pick up that, or you find your sweet spot. But I think that, it's not so much about the years you spent here in the country. It's more about your being open. And once again, you're, being humble and trying to understand, how the locals actually act and how the culture works and so on and so on. Because some people, they can spend, years and years here, but they never open their mind up, to the local ways of doing things. So I think that probably it's not so much a question of a period of time. It's more a question of how open-minded you are. But well, of course, it's
Does that include?
I'm sorry, guys.
yes,
I know
Yuka.
you guys
Sorry.
have 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like,
Welcome, Yuka.
Yay.
Yay.
Sorry about that, because I was just beginning to realize that, like I come to this room expecting totally something different. I
Oh,
didn't realize it's sort of focusing on more cultural side of doing Japan. I mean, doing business in Japan or landing your business in Japan. So I'm sorry, but I'm dying to ask Sam this question, if I may.
Yep.
okay, go ahead.
I'm so sorry about that, people.
And Tim, you're on mute. Tim.
I got it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead,
anyway,
Yuka.
so before you sort of tackle on language issue, on any other cultural issue, so let's say I'm a foreigner. Okay, Sam, so just a brief introduction. I'm a Japanese, but living in the States for a long time, longer than I like to admit. But I loved for Japan to be more economically successful. And for that, Japan need more, capital inflow and a business interest increasing in Japan, like, the capital investment. For that, so before you tackle with any language or cultural issues, why people want to come and do business in Japan? What attracts you? Because, the economy has been sort of stagnating for the last 30 years. And then, yes, population is big enough, but the Japanese consumer demand a very high standard. So if you are a business, just starting out or something, why you pick Japan?
Sure. I think I can actually, and this is something I've been speaking to behind the scenes with Gerard and the people at this Debo company, this marketing company, international marketing company, had some really interesting discussions. I'll tell you why I think it is. There is opportunity in Japan, which I think there's a degree of untapped opportunity in Japan. Like I said earlier, the interest in Japanese culture is extremely high. Think about things like sake. Think about things like Japanese whiskey. This stuff is like gold in the UK. It's very, very difficult to buy sake in the UK, for instance, but it's a pretty popular commodity. If you can get those links between Japan and the UK going better and get these products flowing better, that's a really attractive entity. And the other way around, of course. There's plenty of things, elements, national sort of specialities. Think about Italian food or French food that are really popular, and there's a degree of engagement in Japan for this stuff. I think that there is, again, speaking really broadly, there's just a lot of potential here. There is still an element of separation going on between the sort of Japanese economy and the global economy. There's a phrase known as Galapagos syndrome, which is sometimes used to refer to Japan. The idea that Japan has developed a very unique set of needs, wants, markets, customs that are kind of unique to itself. That's a big discussion, right? To the extent to which that's true. But I think what keeps people coming to Japan is not the fact that they're looking at things like GDP growth. They're not looking at things like, population growth. There's lots of debate and discussion about these elements of Japanese society and culture. There's challenges that Japan faces. There's challenges that lots of other countries face. But I think that there is a lot of potential in the Japanese economy. And I think the killer point is Japanese culture. If I was to pin it down to one thing, I think that there is something about Japanese culture which is inherently very marketable and quite popular. Not just in the West, but globally. And I think that will keep people coming back to Japan. If it can be made easier, investment, engagement easier, better. Let's get that going even more. But I think that is a really powerful asset that Japan has. This sort of cultural magnetism, which I think is undeniable.
I agree.
That's a great point, but some people are kind of anxious or even worried about accepting too much, like a foreign element. Foreign element is not a good word. Foreigners, sort of like a visiting Japan, and some people worried, it may change some aspect of Japanese culture. And then also, I don't know, it's maybe only me, but I don't want Japan to just rely on culture alone. Can Japan make some product which are competitive globally?
Yeah.
I think historically that's certainly been the case in terms of Japanese industry.
Just rely on tourism.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very, I think that's very understandable.
I think it is understandable, and Yuka, I see your point, and I totally agree with it. And I also believe that while there is a huge draw when it comes, to the cultural values and the culture as a whole here, some people find it really. They find it attractive and, in a sense, mysterious and so on and so on. But also, I know that there are some people out of Japan who actually perceive the Japanese market as a market full of opportunities, because, and maybe exactly because of that Galapagos syndrome. The market has been, it has developed its own characteristics, but at the same time there is so much opportunity here for people who can come from overseas, and they can see those opportunities. Because if you're here in Japan and if you're part of the system, if you're part of the Japanese society as a native Japanese, sometimes it's really difficult to spot these opportunities, the gaps that exist. And I think that people, especially people who have that spirit, they come here because they believe that they can find the opportunities and, make use of them.
Great, because I like to see that point, because sometimes, you're right though, the people, the media just focusing on so much negatives. So I like,
Yes.
that's why I usually come to this room to get, positive vibe, So anyway,
I wouldn't take that stuff from a Western perspective. I try not to take that too seriously. A lot of the time, a lot of these publications are writing the same article again and again, and there are also issues that we will face as well. Things like aging population is going to affect most first world developed countries. So it's not like it's some sort of truly unique issue that Japan's facing. But I take your point. It can be annoying. Well, there's some fair points in there, but there can be like a kind of a one-note element to some Western journalism on Japan. It's not quite as sophisticated as you'd like it to be.
But did you see what's his name? Like, the Rupert, somebody, the BBC correspondent who just left Japan to go back to.
That's what I was sort of referring to. That particular article was kind of infamous.
Right, but then he lived in Japan for 10 years, but he said he still didn't see any change in Japan. And I think that was hugely, we debated a lot on that article. But anyway, I'm sorry, it's already like 57 to the hour. Sorry. Thank you, though. I really appreciate your take, Sam.
No, thank you. Thanks very much.
And one thing I wanted to add is, not only I think do outsiders, foreigners who come to Japan to start a business see opportunity. I have a really good friend who's very international. He's Japanese. He's from here. And he is part of a company that his best friend started. I don't know if you've ever heard of Polygon Pictures. And they saw opportunities because they both have this broad global perspective, and they saw holes in the market. And they do 3D, special effects kind of animation, and Disney will hire them, or, Pixar, somebody like that. They found that niche, and they're a growing company. So they've married almost like production, of videos with culture. And that's what the Japanese are really good at, stuff like that.
That's great. Can we invite them to speak to us in this room, Tim?
Oh, he's a busy guy, man. He spends a lot of the time in Malaysia with their other office there, but he's a busy guy.
I can beg him. But anyway, thank you.
I would love to have him on. I should try, but I don't know. I feel bad approaching him, but he's a good guy.
Sorry.
Right, but thank you. So it's just 1 minute before 9 o'clock, and well, it's Wednesday morning. Everybody's busy going to work or preparing for that. And Sam, our speaker today, it's midnight for you, Sam, right?
Yeah, it's just turning midnight.
Oh,
in the
yeah.
UK.
Yes.
Thank you
So-
so much for staying up late.
No, no problem at all. All good.
Thank you. Yes, we appreciate that. And this has been really a great discussion. So
Oh, yeah.
I
Thank
don't
you so much.
Yeah. So I definitely hope that we'll continue it in the future, and we'll have
Definitely.
other rooms as well. To everybody who is listening to us in Clubhouse, please be
Oh,
informed.
Maya, but we have Gerard on the stage.
Gerard,
or-
yes, Gerard,
Oh.
if you have a few words to say just
Sorry,
before.
yeah.
No, thank you, because it's 9 o'clock. We can give you a minute or two. Are you there, Gerard?
Guess
Gerard.
not. Sorry. Go ahead, Maya. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. Okay, so maybe he's not there listening to us. Well, please be informed that we have these recordings on YouTube as well. That's Japan Expert Insights, the channel on YouTube. You can listen to them anytime you want. Also, it is kept here in Clubhouse, or also you can watch us on LinkedIn. So give Sam a follow on LinkedIn. Or here as well in Clubhouse, or follow us in any platform that is convenient for you. That's all for today. So once again, Sam, thanks a lot for
Thank you so much.
this room.
Really, really loved it, and I'd love to continue the conversation another time. I think there's so much to discuss here.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, guys.
To
All
you,
right.
Sam.
Have a good
good
day,
night.
everybody. Thank you
And
for
to
coming.
everyone else, thank you for
Thanks a
coming.
lot, everyone.
Today. Yes, thanks.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.